Well, hello, this is Jeff Gaudiosi, and you're on misplacedstraws.com where music comes to life. And my guest today is making his third trip to the site. He's the keyboard player and writer in the band Pattern Seeking Animals, and they're about to release their fifth record called Friend of All Creatures on February 14th. For my money, they're one of the two or three best bands in the genre, and I'm so happy to have them back on. Please welcome John Boegehold. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much. How's it going?
Good, good. Now, I love the intelligence of your band and the writing behind it. It always leads me to look up new things and discover new
Oh,
writers.
cool.
And let's start with the title of the record, Friend of All Creatures. Where does that come from?
Yeah, the line came from the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu philosophy, and it's the same one that I am of death, the destroyer of worlds, that came from Oppenheimer. And one of the lines was, I am friend of all creatures. And friend of all creatures just seemed like the perfect album title. And uh, I usually write down all, titles and lyrics and stuff like that, and just reading or whatever. And this one struck me as perfect, so I just made sure no one else had the title or it is a band name, and I thought, perfect, that's the album title.
And it works. And one of the big changes with this record is it sees you go from, somewhat of a major label in the genre, Inside Out, to an independent
Uh-huh.
label with Giant Electric P. Is there a freedom that kind of comes with working with that independent label? What brought about the change?
Well, not necessarily a freedom in the creation of the music, because both labels don't, aren't on you as you're creating the record to
Mhm.
do something, to do something a certain way, or I like this, I don't like that. Both are essentially the we turn in the album, and that's the album. There's no back and forth with the label on the artistic side of it. The difference with GEP, there's more freedom as far as promotion and putting things out there. Where whatever, it's like when I go to GEP and I say, I want to do this or that, I go, fine, no problem.
Mhm.
I think one of the issues with Inside Out, understandably, because they're owned by Sony, is that there's certain parameters. Like there's a certain parameter you have to turn in videos with a certain technical quality to it, which is always more to deal with, and that's kind of a pain. And then there's the scheduling, which is can be tough. It can be tough. You have to do this very regimented as far as when certain singles come out. It's great working with Inside Out. Don't get me wrong, but there's less rigidity with GEP, which I really like.
And now you guys are five records in already, which is
Yeah,
amazing to think. And each record, I think, has its own feel and personality, but is yet distinctively a PSA record. I don't
yeah,
think you could take a song off of one of your records and put it on another. It just doesn't work that way, at
right.
least to my ears. I mean, using this record as an example, did you take what you felt were, okay, these are the seven best songs I have in my catalog right now? Or was it more like a puzzle where you're like, this song fits with this and these all go together? How do you compose the record in the sequencing?
Well, essentially, what happens with every record, unless I have something which is a holdover from the last record, which happens occasionally. Um, let's say I wrote, like the first song I wrote from this one, I think was the longest song on the album, which was Another Holy Grail.
Mhm.
And when I was done with that, I said, okay, now I'm going to write something, another song. And the idea was to make it sound like it went with Another Holy Grail, or it wasn't too similar, but not, or it didn't sound like it's coming from another record. So I would just build things up in that way,
Mhm.
um, just to make them sound like they go with the other material. If I start writing something along the way and I'm thinking, well, this is kind of mid-tempo and the same time signature and it has the same vibe as this other song, then I won't go ahead with that one because I don't want anything to be too similar. Just to fit. To me, it just needs to sound like it's part of the same album. And it's going usually halfway through doing this, I know exactly what song is going what position
Mhm.
in the album. And it's usually because, well, this one sounds great coming out of this one, or this one doesn't sound good coming, into that one. So usually halfway through, I know the exact sequence of the album, the songs in the album.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned another Holy Grail. Walk me through a song like that. It has different movements musically. The lyrics really take you on a journey. When you're working on a
Mhm.
song like that, is the seed something in your lyric that leads to it growing, or is it a musical idea? Kind of how does it go to the from the beginning to the finished product?
Well, that one I didn't write in a linear fashion. I didn't start out with the very first vocal section of that song and continue it. About a minute and a half in, it goes into this 7/4 instrumental section, which is like 3 or 4 minutes long. And that was from a riff I had from a song a long time ago, which I never used, which I always wanted to use again. It's like 30, 40 seconds. So I took that and built that whole instrumental section, originally thinking I would start the song with the instrumental section, but decided, well, I think I want to start with the vocal section. So I wrote that section. And that section I brought back later in the song with different words, and then it goes into an up tempo thing, and then I just wrote the rest of the song from there. I'd throw in sometimes in the middle. That song is kind of odd in that I would just go from section to section and didn't write it in a linear fashion. So and lyrically, it didn't really guide me as to what I was going to do with the rest of the song. It's very kind of fantasy imagery type of. There's no real meaning to it, even though it sounds like it might mean something, which I try and do a lot. But yeah, that song I wrote kind of in different sections as I ran along.
Yeah. And like, as you mentioned before, that song's about 12 minutes. That's the longest song on the record. For
Uh-huh.
the most part, with pattern seeking animals, you tend to stay away from that kind of prog trope of the 20-minute plus,
Yeah,
epic track. Everything on this record, you have a song that's under 4 minutes up to a song that's about 12. I mean,
yeah.
as a writer, do you ever think like, okay, the prog thing is I got to do a half hour with different movements, or is it just what you're feeling?
It's what I'm feeling, and the problem, I don't know if it's a problem with me, is that even if I am writing something which is getting into the, mid-teens,
Mhm.
17, 18 minutes a lot of times, uh, I find myself, this happens with not just long songs, but shorter ones, where I'll be working on a song, and as I'm working on it, listening to all the parts, I'll start skipping through sections.
Mhm.
And I think, you know what? If this isn't holding my interest, it's not going to hold the audience's. So I just tend to take things out. There are songs I've done which start out to be 18 minutes long and end up to be 9.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So it's not that I never consciously try. I sometimes in Prague, you can tell they wanted to make that song 20 minutes long, and, and
It
that you
didn't
could
need to be.
tell
Yeah.
it didn't need to be, but you could tell they're trying to write. I'm going to write a song which is 28 minutes long or whatever. Uh, I just don't get that, because to me that's just like uh, it's getting in the way of the song, because there's stuff that doesn't need to be in there and it can be edited. If something you want to say ends up being 25 minutes, great, fantastic. But I think a lot of times it's just to try and get that whole prog thing. We got to have we got to have the epic in there. But of course, people could say the same thing about me in writing, because written a couple of which are in the 16, 17
Yeah.
minute range in the past. But so I'm sure people go, hey, why are you even writing something longer than 5 minutes? Okay, granted, I'll take that criticism. So I do get it.
One song that really grabbed me the first time I listened through the record is Seventh Sleeper. Um,
Uh-huh.
First of all, can you talk a little bit about the lyric and the story behind that song?
They're really, again, Seventh Sleeper was just something, this the old biblical tale about the seven sleepers in Christianity. And there's similar things in Islam and other religions. And I just like the term the seven sleepers. And I wrote it down in my lyrics. I'm going to use that someday. And again, it was just imagery. It was just, I thought, okay, let's make this the seventh sleeper, and they've come out of the cave or whatever. But there's no real story to that song necessarily. It's I guess ostensibly you could say, well, there's someone comes up the mountain and they come across these seven sleepers casting their long shadows. but it's not necessarily meant to be part of the biblical origin. I just I like the imagery of it. So again, and that's something was a song I wrote in a linear fashion.
Mm.
I started out with the first section. There's four sections in that song, none of which ever comes back once those sections are done. And I wanted to, one thing I thought in that one, I wanted to write it in a linear fashion like that,
Mm.
which I think I think it built really nicely. But yeah, lyrically again on this album, I'm not really necessarily going with something of a lyric that is about something.
Mm.
I may have an image in my mind or a scenario situation across, but I like the idea of coming across where the listener can ascertain their own meanings
Yeah.
to the lyrics. Like the old prog stuff, yes, and Genesis, same deal. You know.
And now, staying with that song, but kind of switching to your producer hat,
Uh-huh.
I love Ted Leonard's voice. I think
Yeah.
his performance as that song builds to a climax is one of my favorite moments of his
Oh,
on
cool.
any record he's done.
Yeah.
You guys have worked together so much over especially over the past few years with this band. As a
Uh-huh.
producer, do you need to give direction to get that performance out of him, or has he sung your lyrics so much that he knows where that piece is going?
Yeah, it's kind of like a joke because I can sing enough to get a melody across. Like I'll put a scratch vocal down from him, but I never try and put anything in it like, oh, this is the vibe you should
Yeah,
have, or you should have this.
yeah.
Never. I just sing my flat monotone and I get the melody right, in pitch correction so he knows the melody. I just give it to him and he just goes for it. And he comes up with these great vocal parts. The most thing I'll have to do is, every once in a while, what'll happen is that, could you make this word sung a little clearer?
Mhm.
Or could you, or I'll change something on my end. I'll go, you know what? I decided instead of and, I want to say if there. And I'll say, could you just sing it with saying the word and instead? That kind of thing. But overall, when he gives it to me, it is good to go. It is just a great vocal and it builds and he comes up with real stylistic things I never would have thought of. So, no, it's very rare that I come up back with anything on his vocal parts for him.
Now, the band's performed live sporadically, with
Yeah.
Dennis Atlas and Walter Eno filling in for you in the live lineup. Do you think now that there's five records in that the band's ever going to do more of a formal tour, or do you guys kind of like doing the festival thing?
Well, it's not necessarily it's just very hard for a prog band, especially an American one, to do a tour. It's as simple as that. It's financially, it's really tough, and logistically, we're on the West Coast
Mhm.
here, and even when bands come from Europe to do tours here, they pretty much, for the most part, stay on the East Coast because everything is close. And also European bands have trouble anyway, as financially. They're still, it's still tough for them, and where they can be, in the same amount of time or distance it would take for us to, drive just across California.
Mhm.
In Europe, you can drive across the same amount of time and be in six countries with six capitals and six tours and all these places to play. But even then, it's tough for them because some places, a lot of places don't exist anymore that
Mhm.
to play. So it's tough. We're trying to get a few things together. We're booking the Prague stock later in the year. It's a couple of the things we've talked about, but nothing to announce at this point. I unless we team up with some other act and do some other tour, I don't see us as actually touring per se.
Mhm.
It's going to be more that, well, if we happen to do this gig, maybe we can do one next to it or in the, close to that, something like that.
Mhm. And again, we mentioned five records in less than 6 years.
Uh,
Very few bands do that anymore. Do you see the band kind of keeping that pace up, or do you envision a change to how the band works, or do you guys just business as usual?
Business as usual, because even though I try and get Dave and Ted to write, they just don't want to write these days. And but I just love writing. I get up every morning. You can see my studio behind me, like I can see yours back there. I just get up every morning and start writing, regardless of even if I don't have anything specific to write for. I always put stuff down. So I love doing it. I just absolutely love writing and producing music. So I've already written a few songs for the next album, and I'm going to keep doing it. So when it gets to, critical mass or there's enough for the album, we'll go for it. Whether it's a year from now or a year and a half, whatever, it just depends on, I was trying to do it like once a year. And the first problem we had was when the pandemic happened, there's all sorts of, uh, uh, issues with getting vinyl made and all the, supply chain stuff. So that put us back. I think it was almost 2 years between those two albums, and it was like a year and a half with the last one. But that was a scheduling thing with the record company, and same thing with this one. It's just we decided to do it a little later in the year. But I think putting aside not having to deal with record companies and schedules and forces of nature and stuff like that, I don't think it's a problem for us coming up with an album a year. I really don't.
Yeah, it's funny because you answered the question I was going to ask. Each time you and I have talked, and when I talked to Dave on the last one, at some point you guys have always said, well, the next album's already being written.
Oh
So
yeah,
I just want
yeah.
to.
Oh, I have it. There's a couple songs. Actually, Jimmy's going on tour next month with ABC and something else. But so as soon as he's back, I'm going to go into the studio with at least two, maybe three of the songs to start doing drum tracks for him. So that's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing which can not mess up the schedule. But Jimmy's going to be touring, so it might slow things down a little bit. But yeah, overall, I think we're good. Yeah.
And now, what's on the bucket list for you personally? Do you see yourself, writing for an artist outside of the band, or even writing for something outside of music, whether it's, a book or a movie, or do you just love doing music?
I love doing music. I would never think about writing a book. That would just be. It just seems torturous. I just know myself. I wouldn't like doing it. I've written music, obviously, for film and TV stuff in the past. I just like writing songs to be produced by pattern-seeking animals. But if some other act came along who wanted to do one of them, great.
Mhm.
But I've had some people ask me to write for them. I'm just not in that mind space at the moment.
Right.
That's just not something I want to do.
Mm.
It's just because realistically, let's say, band, whatever, Joe Blow and the Turnip Truck, whatever. Some band came to me and said, "Hey, would you write something to us?" That's the name I just come up with. I got to write that one down. I might have to use it. But
That's the next record. Yeah.
the Turnip Truck. But I know me, and I'd be writing for them, and I would be thinking, "Oh, this is really cool. I want to use this for pattern seeking animals." That's the issue. That's the problem
Yeah.
with writing for anyone else, realistically. Unless someone is paying me for we're going to pay you to write a song for this film or something. Well, then obviously it's something I write for a specific uh, whatever. That's different. But yeah, I think I'm very happy writing for us at the moment. So yeah, no other groups.
And we are very happy that you are. We've been
Oh, cool.
spending some time here with John Boegehold. The band is Pattern Seeking Animals. The record is Friends of All Creatures. It's out everywhere February 14th. It's a fantastic record. I've been listening to it pretty constantly since I got a copy. John, thank you as always for taking the time to do this. And
Absolutely.
I'm sure we will do it again next time. I look
For
forward
number
to it.
six. For
Yeah.
number six. Absolutely. Very good. Good talking to you.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Sure.